hoping to, like a prism, skew the way that you see your own hormonal balance. To think about it in a way that is different and extraordinary and enriching. And it all starts with this notion that hormones are really just about communication inside the body. That's it. I mean, at their most simple, they're ways of getting messages from one place in the body to another place in the body. Now, we have a variety of ways of doing this. There's really two big systems in the body that are helping to make us coordinated and make us work well together. One of those is the nervous system. Now, it's easy to think about the nervous system just as a whole bunch of wires, because really that's what they are. Now, they're super sophisticated. They do things that our computer circuitry can't even think of right now. It probably will at some point, but it's wiring at its best. The hormonal system is a completely different way of sending messages throughout the body. It sends messages through little molecules. So that's it. It's a different way of communicating. So think chemistry set. That's what we're going to be talking today, is just a way of communicating, just like maybe to get here this evening, you've called somebody, maybe you use some electrical devices to do that, and you certainly have maybe through the course of your day done that. Think about hormones as exactly the same thing, except that the way of communicating isn't through wiring and through electricity. The way of communicating is through the dance of tiny molecules that produces this very, very exquisite balance, we hope, inside of the body. But that balance itself is made famous by a whole bunch of little famous molecules. We've heard of progesterone, we've heard of estrogen, we've heard of testosterone, and they clearly are the major players, but they're not the only players in the body. There's a whole bunch of hormones. Some of them you maybe never have even heard about and probably don't care about. And it's not our goal to talk about all those hormones today, because in reality, it doesn't matter. Not to the depth that you think it matters. But what does matter clearly is that when the hormones aren't working right, we don't feel well. You ever see the beautiful sign that's in some kitchens when mama's not happy? What? Nobody's happy, right? When hormones aren't happy, doesn't matter if you are old or young. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you're a human being or an animal being. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be well. And there's an entire beautiful system of medicine that does a great job naming these mountains of symptoms that come about. Now, your symptom may not be mountainous. Your symptom of hormonal imbalance may be very small, so small you may not even recognize it until tonight. You may have been here from some guided intuition. You're sitting there and you're like, by the end of the evening, you're like, I definitely have a hormonal imbalance in this particular area. It might be something that becomes revealed to you. On the other side of things, you might be sitting here and maybe even brought yourself here tonight because you know you have a mountain of symptoms. You know something's going on in your body, but it isn't, just like with the proverbial iceberg, it isn't what you see that's going to get you. The Titanic never saw the iceberg. The bottom, the base, the bigness of the danger was miles in diameter. And I'm not all that interested in the top of the iceberg. I'm not interested in the names of things. We're going to talk about a few names of things, but I want to know, what is the functional imbalance that is manifesting itself as these symptoms? And we can cluster the symptoms and we can name the symptoms, so we're all talking about the same thing. But if I clustered these symptoms for you and said, at a certain time of the month, now you already got me, right? You might be experiencing swollen or tended breasts or constipation, diarrhea. It seems like irritable bowel. You can have cramping, irritable, hostile behavior that maybe doesn't really even feel like you. You could be experiencing depression, fatigue, crying spells, mood swings, trouble concentrating, even trouble with your memory. And we would call that what? We'd call it premenstrual syndrome. So that one was easy. Now, by statistics, which I kind of like them. I was going to say I hate them. I really do like them. By statistics, we're talking about a fairly large number of women that are experiencing PMS symptoms. It's upwards of 40%. That's a lot. Put 10 menstruating women in a room, and at some point in their month, you're going to have at least 4 of them that are having some degree of significant symptoms. It's a lot. Now, a couple gets together, they have an inability to conceive within 12 months of trying, or maybe they are conceiving but having miscarriages, and we call that the label in fertility. It's a tip of the iceberg. We're going to delve into what's beneath that, but the rate at which women and men are not able to conceive is now at 20% of all couples. That's sad to me. Super, super sad. And it's avoidable in many cases. We take a look at a woman of a certain age who is starting to have irregular periods and night sweats and hot flashes, insomnia, being forgetful, maybe anxiety, depression, certainly a loss of libido, vaginal dryness, and weight gain, and we call that, what's the label we call it? We call it menopause. Menopausal symptoms are experienced by 55% of all women that are of the perimenopausal age. That's a lot. That's more than half. And it's not the way we were expected to and designed to be. It may be average and it may be above average. You could say, well, all women experience that, and you would be right if you said most. Doesn't mean it's normal. It's average, but it doesn't mean that it's normal. And you take a guy and his sex drive starts to drop, and erectile challenges and lack of energy and depression, some irritability and mood swings and a loss of strength or muscle mass, increased body fat. We don't call it night sweats with guys, or, we don't call it hot flashes, because if you ask a guy if they have night sweats or hot flashes, they say no, no, no. But if you say, do you ever experience heat surges? It sounds electrical, right? Do you have a heat surge? And they say, oh, I have tons of heat surges. That's andropause. That may be a new word for you, but essentially what it is. And that andropause is experienced by 20% of all men. That's a lot. I kind of like the euphemism of andropause, but I like Time Magazine's depiction. They call it manopause. It's even better. That's even better. So, the question at this point is now what? What are our opportunities now? What can we do? You have a bunch of choices when you're experiencing these symptom clusters. All we did was name them. There's things you can do with the named cluster. And I want to explore all of them with you, because certainly something that you can do is nothing. Certainly, lots of people do nothing as a healthcare strategy. It actually is a healthcare strategy. You may not be claiming it as a healthcare strategy. I think it stinks as a healthcare strategy, but it is a healthcare strategy. And because healthcare strategies have pros and cons, I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of doing absolutely nothing, because it's a possibility. One is it's very easy to do nothing. It's fantastically easy. You know what you have to do nothing? Nothing, exactly. So it's easy, all right? The downside is that you could wind up with some pretty extreme symptoms, and once it starts to snowball, once one system affects the other system and affects the other system, they're off to the races, and it's more difficult to hold something like that back. You also could start to experience lack of performance, mental performance, physical performance. You will not be in the world in the same fullness that you were. Now, whether that's only at 90% or whether it gets down to 30%, that's all luck of the draw and the complexity of what you're experiencing. Certainly it can develop into a disease process. We can eventually name that something's going on in your system that's not right. And it will cause you to do something called camouflage. Camouflage is interesting. We go through life camouflaging, and we have no idea that we're camouflaging our symptoms. But if you're driving into Starbucks a few times a day, you're doing something other than saying hi to Jim and Jane and Joe at the window. You're probably experiencing some degree of loss of your vitality. If you're craving sugar and eating that, craving chocolate and eating that, if you're noticing that your camouflage is just buying bigger and bigger and bigger clothing with each successive year, that's a form of camouflage. It's an adaptation to something that isn't going on in your body that you would expect, something that you wouldn't anticipate. If you've decided that reading a book between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is a perfectly normal thing for you, then maybe you're camouflaging the insomnia that's coming with some of this. You following me? Or you're walking around with an electrical battery-operated fan. That's a form of camouflage. You're taking a symptom and you're saying, I have a solution. I think it kind of is really not a solution. It's a camouflage. It's something to cover up what's going on in the body. But you can certainly do nothing. That's a very, very important strategy. But another strategy, and this is maybe a more common strategy, is to use some form of hormone replacement therapy. It's extraordinarily popular, but it has lots of flavors. I want to go into the flavors of it, not proposing it or any of this as a good, bad, or sideways solution, but nudging you to think that there's some alternatives, but hormone replacement is definitely one of them. And a very popular hormone replacement is something like Premarin, which basically is an extract from horse's urine. Doesn't sound great. They don't put that on the label, by the way. I don't think it would sell a whole lot if it were on the label. But the thought is that horses have estrogen in their urine, and that is absolutely true. The thought is horses have estrogen that's identical to human estrogen. That's absolutely false. And the thought is that that's all there is coming out of a horse, which is estrogen that is like a human, but it isn't quite like a human. The fact is horse estrogen contains 20 different compounds that we don't even know what they do in the human body. Do you know why? Because they're horse hormones. If it was a gerbil hormone, you'll say, that's the stupidest thing. I'm not going to take a gerbil hormone, but we say it's a horse hormone, or we name it Premarin, great name, and doesn't say anything about a horse, and suddenly gobbling that stuff up like M&Ms every day. When we look at the differences between hormones, there's huge differences, because Premarin is not just the only synthesized version of hormone replacement. There's hormone replacements that are analogs and synthetic analogs for almost all the hormones in your body. That's what the natural progesterone molecule looks like inside of your body. Natural meaning this is what it looks like inside of you. But if you go and get a prescription for progesterone, you're not going to be receiving progesterone. They'll call it that, but you're receiving something called a progestin. I have no idea how they make these little fancy suffixes at the back to fool us. Somebody was brilliant. Is it progesterone? Sort of. It's a progestin. That's a made-up word. It doesn't mean anything. You know what it means? It's a chemical. And if you haven't picked it out so far, there's a few parts of that chemical that don't exist inside of the chemical that your body makes. Now, you could say, as the pharmaceutical companies want us to believe, it doesn't matter. You have the main part that's good enough. We just happen to tag on a whole bunch of stuff. By the way, why aren't they just giving us the extract of natural progesterone? Anyone? You can't patent it. You can't make any money whatsoever selling regular old progesterone. Everybody can do it. Why? Because it's natural. It's easy. Everybody knows what it is. So drug companies slap on a variety of different chemicals on top of an existing known compound, and then they patent it. They say, this is our thing. So Provera, nobody else can make that. And then ultimately, make a whole bunch of money at it for some period of time. This is called the use of synthetics. And synthetics are awesome for relieving symptoms. Horse's urine, gobble it up if you want your symptoms to go away. Provera, gobble it up. I guarantee you a lot of your symptoms will go away. On the other side of things, think about this for a second. You can't measure how much of that is in your system. Do you know why? Because there's no blood test for Provera. There's no blood test for Premarin. You are taking a hormone that no one on the planet, or probably in the galaxy, can understand how to measure whether there's enough in your body. So if you're wondering why your doctor didn't use the lab test to determine how much to give you and isn't measuring you with laboratory testing, guess what? They can't. The molecules are too different. There's no lab test for the molecule on the right. Doesn't exist. Now that makes me concerned. That makes me extraordinarily concerned. So if you're unable to measure something, or is there anything else that's a downside to this? Well, it can create resistance. Now this is really fascinating to me, because the purpose of hormones is to trigger a response in the body, and it triggers it by acting like a thumb pressing on a doorbell. So you imagine going up to an apartment complex and you have some choices of doorbells. Some of them are working pretty well. Some of them are working partially functionally, and some of them don't even look like they exist. You have those doorbells in your body. You have doorbells that are functioning well and doorbells that are not functioning well. You have these buttons that over time may have gotten corrupted, may have gotten a degree of error in them. Now, you can go ahead and hit some of these doorbells and not get a signal. And therefore, what you may choose to do is take out of your back pocket a ball-peen hammer, and you will tap it. And I guarantee you the doorbell will ring. Maybe 100 times. But then on the 101st, you have to tap it harder. And then suddenly you're taking a 3-pound sledge out, and eventually you hit it so hard that you whack the doorbell out of existence. This is what happens with synthetic hormones. The downside of them is they produce resistance because they are sliding as a key in a lock into a lock that never was supposed to receive that key. You ever do that? You ever take the wrong key out? You're absolutely positive it's a key to whatever it is you're trying to open. You put it in, you jam, you twist, and eventually it will break off. This is what happens to hormones. They develop a degree of resistance, and especially the synthetics cause significant resistance. Also, the dosing, whether you're supposed to be on this much or this much, is very much time dependent. You have different times, and if we're looking at a woman's cycle, there's different times in that cycle. There's times when estrogen is low and progesterone is low. There's times when estrogen and progesterone is relatively high. And there's times when it starts to back down again. When did you go to the doctor's office? When did they measure you? Did they ask you what day you were in your cycle, or did they plan for your blood draw to be done at a certain time of your cycle? And if not, I will tell you the results are completely meaningless. And you know what? The big fat secret in most docs is that the blood tests are pretty worthless. Why? The reference ranges are this big. You can drive a Mack truck. The reference ranges have to accommodate a woman's cycle from the lowest point to the highest point, which means they're worthless. They're not telling you whether the molecules are dancing well or not. The blood tests don't tell you, and especially if you're not measuring them on a very particular day in the cycle. So they're time dependent. And lastly, there are significant health risks. We've all gone through the, hey, take as much Premarin as you want. It's a great thing. Oops, causes breast cancer. Sorry about that. We're going to back up here a second. Oh, what we should have been telling you is take some Premarin and take some progesterone too. Great. Everybody do that. Oops, sorry. There's cancers that relate to progesterone. What we really meant to tell you is, and it keeps changing, there's significant health risks. These are not molecules to be played with. These are extraordinarily potent molecules in the body. So then you get into a different kind of brand of hormone replacement. It just is hormone replacement. I practice it, but I practice it very, very judiciously. It's called bioidentical hormone replacement. And essentially what you're doing is you're using a substance that is identical to what's inside of the body. Now that makes it a little bit more satisfying to me and more congruent with what I believe we should be putting in our body, which is only things that belong to be inside of our body. It's more personalized. We can actually pick a day of the cycle to measure. We can measure how much is supposed to be in there and try to make some changes based on that. But there's some downsides because it's a hormone that's going in the body. Unless you're microdosing, unless you realize that you're playing with liquid fire, you can quickly overdose someone. Now the symptoms go away. It's a hormone. The symptoms will go away. People will be happy for a short period of time. And then resistance can develop. The doorbell can get rung over and over again. It definitely is time dependent also. You have to be able to monitor this at just the right time, which means you have to be patient enough to go from month to month to pick the right time of the cycle. So you're always comparing apples to apples. But you can measure it, which is great. Still has health risk. If you are not microdosing, if you're not being careful, you can develop other health concerns. So it's not a complete solution. I'm saying it as someone who uses it sparingly and judiciously, but I'm also telling you I use it sparingly and judiciously because there's downside associated, because it doesn't address the cause. It doesn't get beneath the surface of the iceberg. What it says is, I have an iceberg. I have hormonal imbalance. I'm really suffering. And I say, I'm kind of on this planet to relieve suffering. I'm going to help you relieve your suffering, but please let me also get to the bottom of this for you. Please let me figure out what the underlying concern is. Otherwise, you're just playing the whack-a-mole game. You know what the whack-a-mole, this is my favorite game. You like this game? You go to the carnival and essentially get a big rubber mallet and a little mole, plastic mole pops up out of a hole, and you have like 30 seconds to whack the mole. But what happens when you whack the mole? Another mole comes up. And this, hormones are the whack-a-mole game. I guarantee you, if you're not careful, you give a little of this and it normalizes, but this one drops down. So you give it a little of this and it normalizes, and this one drops down. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're simply at the carnival trying to win a Cupid doll. And it's really, really serious. It's very, very, it is dancing where angels fear to tread in medicine. It's something that I've gotten comfortable doing to try to relieve symptoms, but I'm very, very cautious about doing it. So it's led me to the topic of bringing you all here to discuss something which is an alternative to those three things. Anybody interested in hearing that? Okay. First of all, it addresses the root cause. So I like it because it's on the good side of things. It's safe. Everything I'm going to recommend tonight is completely safe for you. It also is sustainable, which means you could do it and keep doing it and do it and do it, and you're not going to develop resistance. You're not going to develop significant healthcare concerns. It's not going to damage your body. Nothing I will recommend tonight will damage you. But the downside is it requires curiosity and patience. You may not have curiosity and patience. You might have patience, but not all that interested in how things work. You may be interested in how things work, but you want to know tomorrow. And if you want that, you can't do that and really get to this root cause of this, because we have to unravel your body. We have to get to the underlying underpinnings of what's going on with you. And it still, at the end of the day, may require a little bit of hormone replacement. Happens. We use judicious amounts of bioidentical hormone, the real hormone that's inside of your body, but it isn't the first line. The first line is treating the underlying cause. Everybody with me? Okay. So it is much less like just finding the right ingredients for a soup. You're not just adding a little more oregano or basil or salt. It is much more like trying to orchestrate a beautiful symphony. It's much more like trying to bring together disparate and myriad parts of your physiology to try to benefit your hormone regulation. I know it sounds complicated, but guess what? It is. Sorry, the body is fearfully and wonderfully made. It's complicated stuff. So finding a guide, finding someone you trust to work with is really important as you're going through, can be important in navigating your way through all of this. So there are 5 areas to pay attention to. And if I could promise you that by just spending a little bit more time with me now, I'll go through those 5. I'll tell you things you can do to understand these 5s better, to understand elements of interaction with those 5 key parts of your physiology, and to leave with strategies that you'll be able to put into your life tomorrow. Will you please stick around and stay? Say yes. Okay, good, because otherwise I have nobody to talk to. We're going to start out with an understanding first about how hormones are made and regulated, because you can't treat those 5 areas. You can't understand the functional imbalances unless you understand what hormones are, where they come from, and how it all works in the first place. Back to this complicated drawing. Guess what? Super complicated, but it's interesting because what you can start to pick out is a whole bunch of things that you might have identified before. You can identify that there's a molecule up there known as cholesterol. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Cholesterol itself is vilified, isn't it? You don't have a lot of people saying, God, I got a lot of cholesterol. I am so happy about that. We have a lot of patients, a lot of doctors on medicines that reduce what? Cholesterol. Do you realize that every hormone in your body, every steroid hormone, all the big ones that we just talked about, they all come from cholesterol. You don't have enough cholesterol, you don't make hormones. And by the way, 25% of all of the cholesterol in your body is in your brain. You try to willy-nilly push your cholesterol down as low as you possibly can, guess what you will push down? You'll take with it your brain. Not a good thing. So we are left with this dance of these tiny molecules, all of them coming from cholesterol. And you can say, okay, there's progesterone there, and we have testosterone, and we have estrogen, and we have things you may not have heard of before, like DHEA and cortisol. But basically, this is where all the hormones live. They're all coming from this primary molecule of cholesterol. And the body biotransforms it. How does that happen? It's kind of like Legos. You all know what Legos are? I got kids young enough to know Legos, but you may not know. So little blocks, you hook them all together. This is a Lego set. The body isn't having a separate pot that it's cooking up a whole bunch of progesterone and a separate pot that is cooking up testosterone. What it basically does is it takes some building blocks and it takes them from one end of a molecule and hooks them onto the other. It's like turning a velociraptor into the Empire State Building in Legoland. All you're doing is using what you have and changing the constituency, and boom, you turn progesterone into estrogen. That's how it works. Now, the body does that with very, very small enzymes. These tiny little arrows between all of those chemicals there are basically the miracle of the body of how it turns one thing into the other. And all day long, we are basically converting one hormone into the other, into the other, into the other. You all been busy today, haven't you? This is going on inside of your system right now. Any of you paying attention to any particular area of this at the moment? You don't. It just happens under the hood. It just keeps on going and keeps on going and keeps on going. Of course, it keeps on going as long as everything is coordinated. As long as there's enough blue little blocks to make the one little thing of progesterone and the red to move to the top to turn the velociraptor into the Empire State Building, you're good. And if you don't have the right coordination, basically you are Lucille Ball. Basically you are sitting there on this assembly line told you're going to lose your job if you don't get the little wrappers on the candies and into a little box. And the assembly line keeps on going, doesn't it? And as it goes, we just start breaking up because there's no way to keep up with everything that's happening. The hormones are being made, but they're not being made right, and we're shoving it in our mouth and down the top and in the hat, and we're laughing. But unfortunately, the body doesn't laugh at this. The body gets seriously uncomfortable. Everybody with me? Do I have your attention? This is how we get into trouble. Because the dance of the tiny molecules is more than going to a doctor, getting a prescription for something, synthetic or otherwise, mashing it on top of all of this and saying, I'm good. Because there's no way to be good with that. There is a way to be good by looking at the dance of the molecules, looking at what makes all of these arrows work and not work, and paying attention to that. Now I've got your attention. That's what these 5 things are about. They're about making the dance of the tiny molecules work in your body. Anything short of that is not addressing the cause, not getting to the root, not getting to the bottom of the iceberg. So the first one is your liver. It's an act known as detoxification. What in the world does our body have to detoxify? And I would say, what in the world does our body in this day and age not have to detoxify? Because it is impossible to get out of bed in the morning and not have a whole bunch of stuff that the body was never meant to deal with wash through the body. Whether it's from the environment, whether it's from pesticides, whether it's from plastics, it doesn't matter. We are just bombarded all day long with garbage. And the garbage is in really crazy places. It's in foods and water and air, and lots of personal care products are garbage. Drugs and alcohol, medicines that we're taking are all overwhelming the liver by asking it to do something it was never intended to deal with. So the tissues of our body gather all their toxins. And they say, we don't know what to do with this, but thank goodness, liver, you're there. Because we're going to basically send everything your way. And the first thing the liver does is it mobilizes it. It pulls it out of all of these tissues. It's able to receive the toxins. And it starts to identify, oh, you look like this kind of toxin. And oh, you look like that kind of toxin. It moves its way through everything that comes through it and says, I know what to do with you. And when it does know what to do with you, it says, look, you're a weird chemical, but I'm going to turn you into something that I can deal with. Because I got to either poop you out or pee you out, but I got to get you out. And getting you into those two systems is not easy because you're weird. You don't even belong in the body. I got to figure out how to dress you up and put, lipstick on a pig to make you look like you can go out through the gastrointestinal tract or the urinary tract. And when that happens, it then finally eliminates. And we all think, thank goodness, I pee every day, I poop every day, life is good, I must be getting rid of all of the toxins. Do you think that's true? It's not even close to true, because there's a lot of them that the liver absolutely has no idea what to do with, or that the liver's failing because it's dealt with it over and over again. You go back into your home and you have all of those little plug-in air fresheners pushing a whole bunch of aromatic hydrocarbons into the air, and you don't know what to do with them. I guarantee you your liver doesn't know what to do with it either. So it just keeps recycling it and recycling it and recycling it. Now, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff in the liver. The liver has a receiving part of it called phase 1 and a delivery part called phase 2. It's kind of like I'm going to take all of the garbage from my house and bring it and sweep it into one part of the floor. And then I'm going to package it up in phase 2, put it in bags, and get it out. It's a pretty logical thing to do. But what if you had somebody doing that in your home that had absolutely no idea how to get stuff that is all swept into a pile into bags? What you're left with is something in the middle of the entire process, which is called an intermediary metabolite. Fancy word. Basically, it means we got the junk halfway through the liver and we don't know what to do with you right now. We've never seen you before. We don't have enough lipstick to put on a pig. We don't know what to do with you. And these are more dangerous than the chemicals that initially were brought into the liver. When you take a chemical and you partially metabolize it, this is important. It's worse than the first chemical that came in. And it's going to be very relevant in a moment when we're talking about hormones. There's a bunch of things you can take to make the liver move better. My favorite is glutathione. In any form you can get it, taking glutathione is a great thing. You can take precursors to glutathione, such as cysteine in the form of N-acetylcysteine. You can take liposomal glutathione itself. It's a very, very valuable substance. I use tons of it with my patients because it is so effective at normalizing this biotransformation. But the most effective thing you can do is eliminate the garbage going in the first place. So I will get on a soapbox for a very short period of time. The best thing you could do tonight is get all of the plastic out of your life. I mean all of it. I mean even the plastic that is containing healthy food. Because healthy food in plastic is still plastic. It still picks up the plastic particles. It still picks up the phthalates. It still picks up the nanoparticles of plastic and sticks them in your brain and your liver and your heart and your kidneys. And especially the plastics that you even think about heating up. This is crazy. We have plastic, which has plastic on top of it that we're going to put our food into, and we will then slide it into a microwave oven and heat it up so the plastics turn into gas. And then they work their way into the food more thoroughly. Oven safe, microwave safe. Who says that? According to who? Who's going to tell me that's safe? It's not safe at room temperature. How could it possibly be safe? How could a cup of coffee at 120 degrees with a plastic lid on the top and a plastic stirrer stuck into the plastic lid that's going to sit on my dashboard for a while I'm driving till it gets nice and cool, be safe for me when I finally go like that and I'm putting that warm liquid against the plastic before it gets in my mouth? Crazy stuff. You all got really quiet on me. Buy glass. You want to get one takeaway today that will change your life. Go home, take away all that valuable Tupperware that you hate, that your sister-in-law stole from Thanksgiving meal 10 years ago, and throw it out. Throw it away. Buy glass. You don't have to do it all at once. Every time you're at the supermarket, buy a glass container. It's fine that there's some plastic on the top. Okay, your food isn't going to touch the plastic on the top. Makes it so you can put a lid on it and not put a lid on it. Besides looking at detoxification as a source of imbalance of hormones in your body, you need to look at your gut biome. What is happening to the good and the bad bugs inside of your body, especially inside of your gastrointestinal tract? So to explore that, we have to figure out how hormones at all can possibly affect and interact with your gut biome. So if you're a woman, you got one of these. This is your uterus and your ovaries. And those produce hormones that go where? Everywhere. If you're a man, Replace the figures, you've got testes, they're producing hormones that go everywhere. Same thing. Now, when these hormones go everywhere, they eventually get used up. The body doesn't like stale hormones. It makes them all day long. If you made hormones once and it lasted your whole life, you really wouldn't need ovaries. You really wouldn't need testes. They're pumping this stuff out all the time. So where does it go when it's done being manufactured and used through the tissues? Yes, you're right. It goes right into your liver. We just spoke about it. Now, this liver is overtaxed and overwhelmed. But let's assume that you all have perfectly functioning livers. Let's assume your body's doing a great job with liver metabolism. It's not getting all wrapped up in those liver metabolites. The stuff going in is turning into the stuff going out. Now, where does it go as the hormones are leaving your body? How does it leave your body? One of the places that it leaves your body, ultimately, is by not coming out, by not leaving the liver's intermediates. When you look at estrogen, the intermediates that are caused by estrogen when your liver is inefficient are 1,000 times more dangerous than any bit of estrogen you would put in your mouth or rub on your body. Making sure your liver transforms these intermediates is critical, but as it does that, it pushes them into your gut. That's where hormones are moved before they leave your body. They pour out of your gallbladder and they get in to the gut tissue. So here's a picture. The top, you see your liver. Your liver is working through those little blue arrows to push a whole bunch of nasty stuff, nasty hormones that it has used. It pushes it into your gastrointestinal tract. Hey, gastrointestinal tract, I've just done my job. I gathered up a bunch of hormones, took a bunch of reactive intermediates that really screwed up the works for a while, but I got them all packaged up for you. They're safe. Now, here's what I want you to do. Get them to leave the body. That's all I want you to do. I'm going to put them in one end, and all you need to do is drop them off at the other end. Sounds like a simple thing. But unfortunately, this isn't what happens all the time. It isn't that you put in hormones at the top of your gastrointestinal tract, they mix with all the food, they get into all of the waste product, and finally they leave through your colon. What can happen is they recirculate, which you don't want. You don't want to take hormones that the liver has once packaged up, put in a beautiful blue bag, gotten it into your colon, gotten it ready to leave your body, and your colon said, oops, let me push that right back into the liver. But it happens. It happens when you have a bad biome. In a good biome, your estrogen, most of it leaves your body. A little bit recycles, but most of it leaves your body. When you have a faulty biome, only a little bit of the estrogen leaves your body, and a lot of it recycles. Now, you might think that's a wonderful solution for not having to take more hormones. But I will tell you that what your body has done with those hormones has turned them into something 1,000 times more dangerous. That's why it's there to leave. It's a metabolite. It's an intermediary. What has your body turned estrogen into? Turned it into a rat's nest. And it's time to leave and get out of your system. And if your gut biome isn't happy, if you have a bunch of bad bugs and the inmates are running the asylum in your gut, you are not going to adequately take all of that packaged hormone and get it to leave the body. Everybody with me? You have to deliver the package. You have to get hormones, once they've been metabolized, out of your system. There's two ways of doing that, two solutions. If you're already going to take calcium, there is a form of calcium you should take. It's not a brand, it's a form. It's called calcium D-glucarate. Now, it's not the calcium that's the miracle here. It's the glucarate, because the body uses glucuronide ions. It uses that to package up the estrogen and the progesterone that has been metabolized. It uses that to keep all of the blue bags around all of the garbage. So it's super, super helpful. Since you're going to take calcium anyway, it's a great form of calcium to take if you're concerned about the recycling of estrogens. And second of all, if you're not currently taking a probiotic, take a probiotic. The balance between the good and the bad bugs in your gut is as important as the balance of the good and the bad bugs in a garden, or the good and the bad bugs in any biologic system. It's just as critical, if not more, because it's where we live. A third area that has significance to us is the regulation of our adrenal glands. Now, this is where we really allow the system to break down more than we should, and this is more under our control than some of these other areas are. Your adrenal glands are located right above your kidneys in the back. So if you feel your ribs and you poke around in the back, somewhere back there are where these tiny little almond-shaped glands are living. And the role of those adrenal glands, one of them, is to create a normal rise and fall of an excitatory hormone known as cortisol. Cortisol is just another steroid hormone. Put it on that list with progesterone, with estrogen, with testosterone. Put cortisol there. Your adrenal glands make cortisol according to a diurnal pattern. Basically, if we just pick your nighttime to start off with, as the day wanes and we get into nighttime, cortisol levels are intended to go down. And then when we hit the bottom, we're supposed to be asleep. And as your sleep pattern progresses and you start moving towards morning, cortisol naturally increases. Why? It's a nice wakefulness hormone. And when it finally gets to a peak, you are awake and you enjoy your day as cortisol begins to fall, and we do the cycle over and over again. Now that's great. That's how it's supposed to work. It was never designed for anything more than instant reactivity. It falls and it goes down and rises and falls. But those big bursts of cortisol, stress bursts of cortisol, were programmed with 20,000 generations of genes in your system to react to spontaneous stress. You're crossing the road with a beloved young child, you see a big truck coming at you at 50 miles an hour, and you pick up the child and you just dive. What allowed that to take place? Cortisol. It was designed for small bursts. It was not designed for the job you don't like every day, the spouse you barely tolerate every day. It was not designed for the emotional issues, the financial issues. It was not designed for prolonged release of cortisol. It was designed to have a normal homeostatic rise and fall. Homeostasis just means corrective, up and down a little bit. But if you go up and down a lot, you start developing a resistance phase. The body stops responding to cortisol, so it has to increase more and more and more and more. And you can't ask your little gland that was designed to react 2 or 3 times in a lifetime to a saber-toothed tiger to react every single day, all day long, to your spouse. Because what you're left with then is an adaptation that leads to adrenal exhaustion. So this is what I see in my practice because I measure cortisol all the time. And I measure it 4 times throughout the day. We do it with a little spit test. Cortisol, 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 cortisol. When you wake up, do it at noon, do it at 6, do it at midnight, and then we paint the picture. Sometimes people are a little off. They have a bad night, they have insomnia. We know there's an issue, so we see a rise in red here. That we can handle. Sometimes I see an individual whose cortisol is high, literally, the whole day. And I go, how in the world are you living inside of that body? You're living with this intensely high stress hormone all day long, which is the equivalent of being chased by a saber-toothed tiger from the moment you get up in the morning until you close your eyes at night. Maybe. And sometimes it just goes all the way through the night. Sometimes I see individuals who are absolutely backwards. They can't wake up in the morning and they can't go to sleep at night. They're like the walking dead in the morning. It takes an act of Congress to get their feet on the floor. But by nighttime, they're looking for the party and they don't want the party to end. Their cortisol level is absolutely flipped. And there are plenty of people that get to me finally where they're in cortisol exhaustion. Their get up and go, got up and went. There's nothing left in their system. Now, why do we care about this? Do you remember these hormones? Progesterone and estradiol and testosterone. When we're young and a woman, most of those hormones are made by ovaries. And as we progress into midlife and peri and postmenopause, your ovaries say, see you later. I'm retiring. I'm going to Florida. You all handle things on your own. There's a wonderful gland I heard about called the adrenal gland. I think she can handle the whole boat all by herself. Bye. No choice here because I've checked out. Elvis has left the building, which is fine, as long as you haven't led a life where basically from a cortisol perspective, you're the equivalent of somebody in the middle of a lake treading water as fast as you can to just make enough cortisol to get through the day. And you're almost drowning anyway. And menopause comes, which is the equivalent of someone saying, hey, looks like you're having a great time out there. By the way, let me throw you a baby. Hold on to this while you're treading water. Why don't you, instead of barely making all the cortisol, by the way, why don't you make all the testosterone and progesterone and estrogen that your body needs? And then we all say, I wonder why when I went into perimenopause that I started to get all these symptoms. Yeah, I might have been a little stressed in my life. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. It has everything to do with everything, because if you haven't prepared your adrenal glands for a new job, and in fact, if you've given it a job that it's ill-equipped to handle, how is it going to do what you need it to do? And by the way, don't you think it might be important now to maybe resuscitate your adrenals a little bit? Maybe give them a little bit of love? There's some great herbs you can use for that. There's ashwagandha, holy basil. These key ingredients, vitamin B5 and B6, absolutely critical. I know when we put the word vitamin in front of something, it sounds like a Flintstones, and like you can't do anything with it and it won't do anything. Sufficient doses of B5 and B6 are absolutely critical for cortisol production, and we wear it out and we deplete it from the body all the time. But the real solution isn't to do this. This is filling potholes. It's important. It's part of it. But you can't just fill the potholes without addressing the root cause. And in our society, we don't celebrate the root cause. We don't celebrate those activities that make us whole. We celebrate performance and achievement. What have you done today? What have you produced today? What have you contributed today? You go up to somebody and say, hey, how was your day? God, I had a great meditation today. You look at them like, you know, you're from Mars. Well, that's great, but what'd you do after that? Did you make anything? You cook anything? You build something? You put something together? You invent something? No, I just had this awesome meditation today. And we're like, well, that's super interesting. I'm going to go talk to somebody else who's doing something with their life. We don't celebrate this. Now, the interesting truth about this is it doesn't matter what you do, as long as it brings you to this state. You can do it through meditation. You can do it through music. You can do it through the love of animals and working with animals. You can work in your garden, as long as you're not stressed about what bulb is going to come up. If you're in a place of joy when you're doing it, it doesn't matter. But if you want the fastest way to get to it, if you want the secret sauce, if you want to absolutely bypass the thinking, critical, naming, judging mind, and get down to your root and get down to your basics, then you practice yoga. It's amazing that we're in a yoga center while we're talking about this. Yoga has specific powers because it uses the somatic body, the physical body, to put the mind, the heart, and the spirit at rest. It does an amazing job at bypassing the garbage that we get kind of caught up in. And I've really never talked to somebody after taking a yoga class that said, God, that was the most stressful thing I ever did. What they say is, I feel amazing. I feel really amazing. I feel different. I feel changed. I feel more like myself. Can I just stay here for a while? Can I live here? Can I move in? You got a job for me? What can we do here? They experience this on a regular basis. You happen to be in a center that offers yoga at an extraordinary level to meet you wherever you are. If you're a group person, then come into a class and join a class that's appropriate for you and your body and where you are. I always hesitate to put, I really struggled with the picture of this. I think images evoke so much, right? So I brought Martia and we're like talking about this, and I'm like, you know, the thing that really gets me is that none of us really are as flexible as we want to be. So whatever picture I put up there, people will typically say, I can't do that. I can't do that. So, pass, it's not for me. It's kind of like saying, look, I'm starving, so I can't eat a meal. This is a means to an end. It's not the end. And it doesn't have to look like that. If you all ever watch me do my yoga practice, I guarantee it doesn't look like that. A funny body, funny limitations, all sorts of tightness in weird areas, and it still meets me where I need it to be. And I don't care what I look like, because the point of a yoga class is not what somebody is seeing in you, it's what you're seeing in yourself. It's what you're tapping into that's new. So to get past the whole adrenal thing fast, you could take a whole buckets of ashwagandha and holy basil and B5 and B6, and it will help. But you've got to change and break free. You've got to break the patterns that have your adrenals in overdrive. I think yoga is the fastest way of accomplishing that. Beyond adrenal regulation is your blood sugar control. This is actually a kissing cousin to what's going on with your adrenals. When you eat food, a lot of you ate before you came to be with us all tonight, you have eaten food and it fills your body with something called glucose. Glucose itself is the primary energy currency in the body. Every cell in your body uses glucose. That's what it transforms into energy. It doesn't transform lima beans and salad and salmon or tofu into energy. It transforms it into glucose, and that makes energy. Funny thing about glucose is it doesn't go into your cells. Not easily. It doesn't go into your brain easily, or your heart, or your muscles. Glucose is kind of like trying to pass softballs through a screen door. By design, the cells don't absorb glucose well, because if we just filled every cell with all the glucose that came into your body with a meal, you'd kill off the cell. It would be like dumping 2 gallons of gasoline directly into the carburetor of your engine. Would you get it started? You know what that's called? Flooding an engine. Not a good thing. So the body has a carburation mechanism. It has a way of gently regulating the amount of sugar that goes into the cells, and that's called insulin. It's another hormone, a little different kind of hormone, not the ones that we're talking about, which are called steroid hormones, but it still is an important hormone. It acts as a key in a lock. When you eat and glucose levels rise, insulin is secreted. And like a key in a lock, it goes into the cell, turns the key, and it opens the doors. Suddenly, all of the food that you ate that turned into glucose appropriately goes into the cells as energy. That's the way it's supposed to work. But for a lot of us, we're not getting that nice little blue line of the rise and fall of glucose in our body. We're not waking up a little hungry and eating, and it goes up a little bit, and then after a little while, by late morning, it's going down, and again up and again down. We have half of us tonight probably have some tendency towards the blood sugar being a little too high, to where glucose sticks around a little bit too long in your system. It's called insulin resistance. The mechanism of it, whole different story. But the other half are probably dealing with blood sugar that goes too low. Blood sugar that causes us to get so nauseous because it's so low in the morning that we don't eat, and it makes it even worse. Blood sugar that gives us all sorts of symptoms. The issue is that we have to have the right amount of insulin to get sugar to go into the cells, because if it doesn't go into the cells at all, and it makes an issue occur. And that issue is either high or low blood sugar. You're either running around saying, I'm having mood changes, hunger, headaches, all sorts of dizziness and sweating and tiredness and trembling, or you're running around with dry mouth, extreme thirst, frequent urination day and night, big reason for frequent nighttime urination, or you're having drowsiness, you eat a meal, and you pass out. Frequent bedwetting, maybe not a lot of you, but this is frequent in kids and a frequent cause, as well as stomach pains. All sorts of symptoms come when blood sugar isn't regulated well, but what in the world does that have to do with your hormones? Do you want to know the number one thing that makes those arrows move well or not? The number one thing that takes the Legos of one hormone and causes it to turn into another hormone? Do you want to guess what the number one thing is? Blood sugar regulation. If you ask me today, what's my big strategy here? Get the plastics out of your life. Regulate your blood sugar. Because the transformation of these hormones will follow suit and you will do better. May not be perfect, but you're going to do better. If your blood sugar is stabilized, you will be stabilized. Your hormones will be stabilized. So what can you do? First of all, reduce all of those nasty, simple carbs, the stuff on the right side here. High glycemic foods, the foods that are processed, the breads, the cereals, the grains. Reduce these. There are plenty of grains out there, and there are plenty of other products that don't literally create kindling in the body. You don't want kindling. You want the left side. You want oak. Oak that meets your own body's needs. And you can make all of the different changes on the left side that you need to, but assure that you're doing so in a way that's compatible with your body, but more importantly, compatible with your blood sugar. And aside from just simply reducing those carbohydrates, the most important thing you can do is a variation of exercise. And I'll have to change the name because it sounds too hard. High intensity interval training. It sounds hard. It sounds painful. I need to come up with a zippy, easy kind of name for this. Burst exercise, happy exercise, something. It's so simple. It's so simple. It's way simpler, I guarantee you, than any exercise you've done so far. Because it's not what you do, it's how you do it. You can apply this pattern to literally any form of exercise. And it goes like this. You only need to exercise 10 minutes a day. Do I have your attention so far? But you have to do it every day. And if you exercise 10 minutes every day this way, you will transform your insulin receptors. You will make your body's blood sugar regulate itself so much better. The pattern goes like this. If you came over and said, okay, I want to learn this, but I want you to show me, I'd say, great, meet me outside my office at 4:05 in the afternoon and I'll have my stuff ready. We walk outside there together and I say, okay, start. I want you just to start. Show me what your walking pace is. And you're like my fast walking pace? I'm like, just what's your strolling pace? Get walking. And you're like, okay, here I am walking. I'm like, good. That's a level maybe 2 or 3. Now, what we're going to do for 30 seconds is I'm going to have you give me a level 9, 10. And you say, all right, I'm going to do it. And you go ahead and for 30 seconds, you give me a level 9 or 10. Now, you know how I'm going to know if you're at a level 9, 10? I'm going to ask you a question in the middle of it. And if you can answer me, you're not at a level 9, 10. Level 9, 10 is like the eyes are bugging out. You're going so hard, you got a funny face. You maybe beads of sweat are bursting out, and you're thinking you're going to die because you're not going to be able to make it another second. And 30 seconds, by the way, feels like 3 hours at a level 9. If it doesn't feel like it's too long, you're not doing it hard enough. But then you know what you do? You just back it down for another 90 seconds. And you go ahead again and again. 90 seconds easy, 30 seconds hard. 90 seconds easy, 30 seconds hard. And guess what? 5 of those a day. 5 30-second bursts separated by 1.5 minutes of recovery. Not stopping, recovery. Pace, recovery pace. And you biotransform your insulin receptors better than 20 to 30 minutes of intense or low exercise. The whole Jane Fonda thing where you get into a class and they get your heart rate up to a certain level and you hold it there for 20, 30 minutes, debunked. Doesn't do what we think it does. Causes a lot more injury over time. There's probably none of us here tonight that can't afford 10 minutes out of our day. And I guarantee you there's nobody here that can't afford and need to get their insulin regulated. It's a key thing for us. So aside from looking at detoxification, what goes into your liver and how efficiently it comes out, looking at your gut biome, whether you're keeping the stuff that is packaged for delivery out of your body packaged and not resorbed back into the liver, the regulation of your adrenal glands so that they can make the adequate amount of hormone for you, the regulation of your blood sugar so that you can biotransform the hormones one into the other. The last area to take a look at is the control of inflammation. Now this is a big one, and this is a complicated one, but I'm going to make it as simple as I possibly can. Hormones work because they're a chemical that touch different cells in your body, and they hit certain receptors, like a key in a lock. That's the simplicity of a hormone. When a hormone moves and eventually gets over to the receptor itself and gets into it and touches it, something cool happens. Some process happens in the body. Remember, I started our discussion tonight with this topic that basically hormones and endocrine system are just communication devices. And the way they communicate is by going over and touching different cells in your body and saying, you go a little faster and you go a little bit slower. Now, that's all great as long as those receptors are good. The moment you start screwing up your receptors, you can produce all the hormone in the world, but you're not going to hear the signal. Your cells aren't going to respond to that hormone. And one of the things that screws up those receptors more than anything else is inflammation. And it doesn't matter whether it's inflammation in your somatic body, your muscles and your joints and your neck and your back and your elbow. Your body doesn't know where the source of the inflammation is. It doesn't know if the source of the inflammation is your belly because you've got a chronic problem that you haven't addressed in digestion. It doesn't know. Inflammation is inflammation to the body. And unfortunately, inflammation disrupts the lock and key mechanism in our body. Said one more time, you can make all the proper hormones in the world. You could have done everything I've just described perfectly up until now. And if you have chronic inflammation in your body, you won't really signal properly. The hormone won't touch the cell in the way that it's supposed to touch the cell. Where does it affect? Everywhere, including your brain. Everywhere in your body is affected by this signaling, and every gland in your body is affected by this signaling. You probably know, because we talked about that ovaries and testes produce hormones. The adrenals we just spoke about do that. We didn't tell you that insulin was made in your pancreas, but that's another place that produces hormone. We've not mentioned thyroid in your thymus, but all of the hormones in your brain with names like serotonin and dopamine and acetylcholine, these are important hormones that allow the body to signal inside of the brain. Inflammation disrupts those hormones too. So our brain doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. The way that we change our inflammation pattern is by changing our eating pattern. And it comes down to this notion of what are called omega-3s and omega-6s. And before you turn it off and think, well, he's just going to talk about fish, and I don't like fish, but I eat a little bit of fish, stay open with me for a second, because this is a really big game changer. This is really a big thing to understand. Essentially, there's two different kinds of fats, and a lot of stuff contains fats, and fats are awesome. Fats are way better than carbohydrates. Fats are a miracle, but there's two different types of them. There's the fats that are in seaweed and algae, things like spirulina. There's fats in nuts, and there's also fats in dairy and oils and chicken and grains. They're not the same. The fats in the standard American diet are not the omega-3 fats. The fats in the Mediterranean diet are, but not the standard American diet. The standard American diet is omega-6 based. Even when we say, I interview patients extensively as we're working with them, and with a great deal of pride, a lot of people tell me when I'm asking them about their diet, and I say, what do you eat? I eat a lot of chicken. I can promise you I eat a lot of chicken. As if I'm from the poultry lobby, and there's just want to impress the heck out of me about how much chicken they're consuming. Chicken is fed what? What are chickens fed? Grains. Grains turn into omega-6s, pro-inflammatory. Chicken is pro-inflammatory. It just is. Sorry. When you eat it, you're basically eating something that will cause inflammation in your body. There's plenty of things that don't do that. I mean, salmon has a ton of omega-3s in it. Oysters do. Sardines do. And then you can say, well, absolutely true, but there's also non-animal sources of these things. Walnuts have a good amount of omega-3. Chia seeds, flax seeds. In fact, if you look at the numbers on here, you might think something really unusual. You're like, well, it looks like salmon has maybe 2 grams of omega-3s. And, chia seeds have like 5 grams in a serving. If it's all omega-3s and all omega-3s are the same, I'm probably getting everything I need to from what's happening below, from these non-animal sources, if that were only the truth. There's not one thing that's called an omega-3. There are three things that are omega-3s. Omega-3s are something called DHA, EPA, and ALA. They're not the same. And when you are consuming non-animal, traditional animal sources of a variety of grains and nuts and seeds, you're basically consuming a lot of omega-3 in the form of ALA, which is fine, unless you're one of the 60% of people that have certain genomic variations that don't allow you to biotransform ALA into the usable anti-inflammatory omega-3. You have to turn ALA into EPA and DHA for it to be anti-inflammatory. It's not anti-inflammatory because it's an omega-3. So if you have these genetic variations and it's in the population, it's in the world, you can't easily biotransform the omega-3s that are coming from some non-animal sources. You have to work a little harder. It's not impossible, but you have to work harder at this or you won't make that transformation occur. You could eat chia seeds until you blow up like a chia seed, and you are still not going to get anything other than that ALA if you have that genomic variant. So what do you do about all of this? First of all, don't focus on things that have ALA. There are plenty of non-meat sources. If you're into non-meat, there's plenty of non-meat sources, but you've got to work kind of hard. Like of all of these things, by the way, that are non-meat sources of omega-3s, it's just the spirulina here. It's just that source that has the omega-3 in the form of EPA and DHA. It's the one that shifts away from the ALA. What's the upshot here? Lots of seaweed. They had it right in the traditional Japanese diet. Lots of seaweed, lots of kelp, lots of seaweed sources have tons of EPA and DHA. So if you don't want to eat salmon and you don't want to eat those other sources and sardines and oysters, which I don't blame you for some of those, make sure you're getting not just omega-3, but to make sure that you're getting omega-3 in a source that has the true anti-inflammatory EPA and DHA associated with it. It's that simple. You can begin to biotransform the efficiency of your own hormone system into a smooth-running, equilibrated, masterfully orchestrated, symphonic-like system by paying attention to these 5 key elements: getting your liver functioning appropriately, getting your gut functioning appropriately, getting your adrenal regulation and your blood sugar regulation, and reducing the inflammation in your body. It's that simple, and it's also that hard because it involves change. You have to be a change agent for your own body.